I think the Championship relegation battle has had a lot of twists and turns so far this season, and that's because there's so many teams that have been in the conversation. Yes, sides like Preston North End and maybe even Oxford United have pulled away a little bit from the conversation, but there's still 8, 9, 10 teams that you could argue are in that mix to get relegated. And I think that makes it a really exciting last 20 odd games of the season. Even Plymouth Argyle, for instance, who had looked by far the weakest side in the division for much of the campaign, they got an encouraging result and performance at Sunderland. So it really does feel wide open, and I can't wait to get stuck into who's going to stay up and who's going to go down on this Championship podcast. Yes, welcome along to EFL Debate. You can get subscribed to us on YouTube and on Spotify. That would help us out a lot. And talking of YouTube channels, you can also subscribe to the Jack Ward Football Podcast for plenty of Championship content. Jack, great to have you on as ever. First question, I don't know if you're able to get the table in front of you for the Championship at the moment, but how far do you go up to in the Championship table in order to call, which teams would you say are part of the relegation dogfight, and which teams can we sort of rule out at this stage?
How you doing, Gab? Yeah, I'm good. You know what? I think if it was anyone but Oxford United involved, I probably would say sort of where we currently are at, I think. But I'm not going to say that because I am still absolutely frightened. So let's not say that. But I would say I think I'm not going to say we're safe. Absolutely not. I am too cautious to sort of come out with statements like that this early. There's 29 games played, but there's still a lot of football to still be played. I
51 think points to play for.
And when you put it like that, Gab, you're not helping my anxiety. You're really not. I probably would say I think we are there. You can go. I think Preston are safe, and if Preston are safe, then we're only 1 point behind them. I would say around that 14th, 15th section. I think for the sake of my mental health, I'm going to say 15th and below. And I think a lot of that is down to the current state of play and sort of where these teams are at, and trajectory momentum is so important in football, as we know. And suddenly a team, like you mentioned in the introduction, can feel safe, and then you can get dragged into it. If you don't win a game in 3 or win a game in 4, suddenly you're sucked back into it. But I would say around 14th or 15th. But it's quite unusual to be 29 games in. Yes, there's over 50 points still to be played, but I still think there are lots of teams down there. And teams like Swansea are a prime example that you felt a couple of weeks ago could be knocking on the top 10 and could be knocking on a late playoff charge. They've lost 4 out of their last 5. And they're now 17th, and I think well and truly back in that conversation. So every week it changes. In answer to your question, I would say around 14th or 15th. I don't know about you.
Yeah, what I'm really intrigued by as well, Jack, is because I would agree with you. I think I would probably rule Preston North End just about in the safe category because 6 defeats in 27 doesn't happen by accident under Paul Heckingbottom, and I think there's a large enough sample size there to say North End have got a real solidity about them, and I don't think you can get relegated with losing 6 games in 27 in a season. But I think what I'm really intrigued about, as well as the number of teams involved, is actually what points tally it's going to take to stay up. Because on the one hand, as a relegation candidate this season, you can look at it and say there's more teams that we could be able to drag in, as opposed to having a kind of a situation where loads, most of the potential candidates are out of reach. I don't think that's the case this time around. I think there's a lot of sort of social mobility, if you like, in the bottom half of the Championship. But I also think that the flip side of that is they're all going to take points off one another. And I think if you rule out the top 4, even the playoff candidates in the Championship, outside the current top 4, they're all wildly inconsistent. And that means that I think everyone's going to take points off everyone outside the top 4. And that means that, we could be having a similar situation to, I don't know if you studied the Championship at all in the 12-13 campaign. It might be a bit before your time, but, Peterborough got relegated with 54 points or something like that. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if we had something close to that.
I mean, this season, I had a little brief look at last season. Plymouth stayed up with 51 points. Birmingham went down with 50 points, as I imagine you're definitely aware of. And I think that's... and there's always that cliche, isn't there? Get to 50 points. I think that there's that feel that with a team like Oxford, for example, I imagine the teams in that conversation expected to be down there from the start of the season. You're almost sort of counting down those points, aren't you? Sort of go, right, we've got 14 points to go, right, 15 points. But there isn't a set target because of how the league isn't. Like you say, everybody's taking points of everyone. And the reason why, to briefly bring it back to us and Oxford, is because what I am encouraged by is the fact that we are able to pick points. You know, we've beaten Plymouth, we're unbeaten against them. We've beaten them and got a point against them. We've beaten Luton and got a point against them. We didn't lose to Derby, didn't lose to Portsmouth. Stoke, we picked up some points. Hull, we've beaten. Cardiff, we've beaten. Millwall, we've also beaten. So you sort of look at that and you go, right, if you can pick up points against those teams around you, the old saying is true. You are stopping others from accumulating points, and you're also adding to your own tally, and that will naturally draw you away. If you are looking at just staying in the division, which a lot of these teams are, the best thing you can do is pick up points against the teams that you imagine are going to be down there in that dogfight. So you are right. It does scare me when you've got teams, you know, with 50, 51 points that either got relegated or just stayed up last season. But I think it probably will be the same because, like, I feel like there's almost 2 league tables in this championship season. You've got that top half, and the teams that are really pushing at the top end. You've got almost a mini league table below of teams that are in this sort of relegation conversation. That's how I'd split it from about 14th upwards and then 15th downwards. You've got 2 league tables essentially, haven't you?
Yeah, and then 3 if you include the top 4. Well, delighted to bring in my first guest of the evening, Lewis Williams. You can get subscribed to Lewis's excellent work on YouTube, talking about the Hatters. Lewis, not a great time to be talking about Luton Town, and I suppose what really sort of startled me is you've taken 1 point right from the last 7 games, and I think you said this on your channel the other day. That's actually, you didn't actually have this bad form when you were in the Premier League last season, which is very odd. So you must feel quite baffled right now as a Hatter.
Yeah, and basically that, yeah. After the game against Millwall on the weekend, I normally, when I'm angry about a performance, I kind of, as soon as that final whistle goes, I'm out. I'm out the stadium because I just get really angry and I'm just like, get fed up. So I just rather just go. But at Millwall, on Saturday against Millwall, I kind of just stood there and I just looked at the players and I'm like, you've got no fight. You've lost that ability to want to stay and fight for the shirt. And while everyone else was booing them, I was just looking at the distance thinking we're down, because I can't see us getting out of this unless we bring 3 or 4 players through the door, because some of these group of players think they're starting next week and they don't have no competition. So I feel like it's a proper mentality thing with Luton, and unfortunately, we've made certain decisions far too late. We should have pulled the trigger with Rob Edwards a lot sooner, when proven championship managers were there, ready to take. Didn't do it. Oxford got there first with Gary Rowett. Stoke got Mark Robbins, and we were left with a couple of young, hungry managers, really. So we're putting a lot of pressure on Matt Bloomfield, who I just feel sorry for.
Yeah, I mean, it's really weird to me, Lewis, looking at this from the outside, because you sort of look at the squad, and it is a squad that kind of jumps off the page. Like, we were waxing lyrical about Marvellous Nakamba this time 2 years ago. We were waxing lyrical about Carlton Morris, about Alfie Doughty. And it seems just really weird to think that this group of players that you've got isn't good enough to get yourselves out of there's not. I had a look at the 11 that played against Millwall, and there's nobody other than maybe Amari Bell, who I'm not a huge fan of. I think he has his limitations, but there's nobody there that I would have said they're definitely not good enough on paper. So do you think it's a case where you bring in 2 or 3 leaders into this group, 2 or 3 really strong characters who can kind of have a ripple effect, and some of that quality comes back? Or do you think that there are some deep-rooted cultural issues that's just gone so far down the line that it's going to be difficult to repair?
I think it's the latter. I think this group of players is just, they're so used to losing. That losing mentality is installed within the group. Like you said, like, this group of players on paper, they're proven championship players, and that's what angers me more. You know, you've got strikers that have scored goals at this level. Elijah Adebayo is one of our worst performing players in the team. yes, Alfie's been out injured for a while, so he's glad to have him back. But the rest of the group of players, they've all proven, they've all been, they've all played like roughly near enough 100 games in the Championship. A lot of, I think it was 6 players that started, or 5 or 6 players started against Millwall, one promotion out of this level with us. So it's not like it's brand new to them. So I just honestly I don't know, because these group of players, the January transfer window, whoever you bring in, they also need the players around them to perform well. You're not guaranteed instant impact by signing, like a Louis Barry who's on the virtual signing for Hull, for example. He's not guaranteed to come to a club like Luton and perform straight away. He needs the players around him to perform. Otherwise, you're just going to keep getting the same answers. But I think a rebuild is completely needed now, whether we stay up or go down. But I think we're down. I unless these players prove me wrong. Because what I watched on Saturday, I saw a team that had no idea and just had no fight. And that's what scares me for the rest of the season.
It's a concerning time. I watched them. I watched Luton when we beat them 3-2 last week.
Thanks for that reminder.
Yeah, sorry, Lewis.
Yeah.
No, and you are right. That point you make about the good teams winning becomes a habit, right? And that's the same with losing. Losing becomes a habit, and you can get stuck in this cycle of you try different things. You can change your manager. But if you look at the underlying metrics, I'm sure you're aware of, and you watch them every week, so I don't need to go through them. If you look at the goals per match, you're in the bottom 4 for that. Goals conceded per match, you're 22nd for that. The key numbers and the eye test, you are comfortably in that bottom section. If you're not scoring enough goals and you're conceding way too many, I'm ready to state the obvious right now. You're going to drag yourself in there, and you're going to be in that bottom 3 conversation, or as you currently find yourself actually in the bottom 3. And I get your frustration because you've got players there that when the team sheet comes out against Oxford, and I don't watch you every single week, I know you're struggling, but I don't watch you every single week, I go, this is going to be a really difficult game. How is this Oxford United versus Luton match a relegation 6-pointer? At the start of the season, you look at this as Oxford versus Luton, a team that's come down from the Premier League, and you go, this is going to be a really difficult test. And you've got players there that look absolutely shot of confidence. And I agree with you. You've got a manager in Matt Bloomfield, did a fantastic job at Wycombe. But he also had to build that team. I look at that Wycombe team that he's built now. That took growing pain. That took a lot of time. I was on the show with Gab when Wycombe was struggling last season in League One, and I came on here and said they stuck by him, and loyalty is important, and they allowed him that a room to get as good as they are. But doing that mid-season is so difficult. Coming in mid-season when you are in a very difficult position as it is very difficult. And you speak about a rebuild. You do not want to be talking about a rebuild of the 29 games in that bottom 3 because it is virtually impossible. Like you say, you can't ship 11 players out and bring 11 players in this current window because the cohesion looks extremely bothering at the moment. And I get the overwhelming word I come with. I guess I align with Luton at the moment is frustration because you've got players there that have proven at this level that they can be more than helpful. But the psychological impacts are so important in football, and if you do lose games quite comfortably and quite easily, suddenly that becomes a habit, and that's a dangerous habit.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's not even as well doing the basics right. I think, in that game, the 3-2 game at Oxford, you look at the 3 goals which Oxford scored, with no disrespect. They were nothing special, were they? They were just crosses into the box, and we're allowing a player 3 in the 6-yard box. The ball, I think, took forever to drop to his head, and he had all the time in the world to just guide it into a corner. That straight away, if we can't even do the basics right and mark a player in a box, especially in the 6-yard box, you've got no chance of staying up. So it's essentially like it's either players have to, wake up, or we're down. Unfortunately there's no in between now. And I think if I've got my delusion hat on, we're the only side in the division that hasn't actually had a good run of form at any point in the season so far. We've not actually sparked it. So maybe, I don't know, if we do get a win somehow, eventually, that win might kickstart a run of form. But I'm just, that's me just being delusional right now because I just can't see it. I know we've got some really tough teams coming up. against those types of sides, will we have a little bit more space? Because the recent teams which we've had, our teams are just willing to put 11 players behind the ball and go, come and break us down, which we've been struggling all season with. So maybe against a side that's actually going to attack us, like a Leeds or Sheffield United, we might have more space, but this is just me.
You can't defend like that
hopeful.
against them.
No,
That's
exactly. So this
got
is what I mean. It's just I just don't know what else to expect. The one good thing since Matt Bloomfield has come to the club is the midfield's got better. Nakamba's actually playing in his correct position. He's not playing in a two-man midfield. So he's just been told, right, you're sitting and you're doing the defensive side, and he actually has performed well. Clark's been given the freedom to attack. I still have question marks over Kraus, but unfortunately,
Do you think you need another physical, tenacious type in there, Lewis, just to secure things in midfield?
We need a creator.
Okay.
We need a creator, because no disrespect to Clark, he can't do it on his own, and we don't have anyone else, unfortunately. So we need someone who can create something, because against Millwall and against Preston, that you could have gone on for another 4 or 5 hours and we weren't scoring a goal. So that tells you everything you need to know. And I looked at the stats for us. So bearing in mind, the last 3 games, we've changed our formation. We've gone to like a 4-2-3-1. So we're playing with wide attackers now, rather than the traditional wing backs which we were playing in the Premier League and what we got promoted with. The last 3 league games, we've swapped our wide attackers and our strikers. None of them have had an impact. And the last time a player came off the bench and scored for Luton was early November in a 5-1 defeat against Middlesbrough, which was Jordan Clark. So even the players off the pitch, who are not playing in the starting 11, are not even helping us. So it's the whole squad. It's not even just 11 players on the pitch.
What I wanted to talk to you briefly, Lewis, about I suppose the decision making at Luton Town, because I think that what's very clear to me is that when you talk about David Wilkinson, Gary Sweet, Mick Harford, these are people who bleed white and orange. They're the 2 primary colours for Luton Town, aren't they? So they're very much. They care deeply about the football club. I think there's maybe question marks about. They've been very focused on building the new stadium, haven't they? And a lot of investment's gone into that. And I actually applaud them for that in some ways, because there is an era of football and society which kind of rewards instant gratification, where, whatever's going to make you look popular in the here and now. And this stadium is going to help Luton Town for another 100 years or so. So I think there is credit to them for thinking about the long term. At the same time, there is a feeling that you've not replaced players well enough, and you've not invested enough into the squad. So clearly, it's going to be a big week ahead in the transfer market.
Yeah, 100%. I think what's happened in the summer, I think as the current ownership, they've never been relegated from the Premier League before. So that was straight away, you're learning something there. But what they said in the summer was, apparently we were talking to some bad agents, and a lot of fans out there have gone, well, that's not an excuse, But the reality is, there is high expectation now because of the money, which the Premier League brings. And I think some people out there think we should be competing with the same players which Sheffield United and Burnley are competing with. We're not. We've got a strict financial model. We can't do that. If I'm being honest with you, a lot of teams in the Championship still have a bigger pool than what we've got. So we have to be smart. But the problem is, in the summer, when you don't bring enough players through, and the warning signs were there in the summer, because we went into that first game of the season against Burnley, and lost 4-1 with a backline of the average age of 19 years old. Straight away, the problems were there, and we were like, what is going on? Why? Because we've always been proactive in the window. We normally go through the list and go, right, if we can't get in, we get him. If we can't get in, we get him. But we just haven't done that. And when your owner comes out when the board come out and say, right, we're going to have an aggressive January transfer window, and you're seeing clubs like Hull, for example, who have signed 6 or 7 really good players, and your club's only brought in, Isaiah Jones, who's who was not a regular starter for Middlesbrough.
I mean, I
There
think
was
Isaiah
quite
Jones was a good signing. I wouldn't argue with that as a signing. I think he was fantastic at this level there a couple of years ago. I think, there's every chance he could get back to that sort of form.
But you see what I mean, though, when we're looking at a squad player rather than a guaranteed regular starter who's going to come in and hit the ground running. Of course, he might still be able to do that. But when you've got a club like, for example, Hull, who's bringing 6 or 7 players, and you've seen Matt Crooks already, who's bagged a goal against Sheffield United, it's just like, right, other clubs are doing it, but you're not quite doing it. Sure. And again, today, I think we've put in a third bid for Richard Kone at Wickham. It just feels like at the moment we're putting all of our eggs in one basket, and we haven't learned from what happened in the summer or what happened in the January transfer window last month.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's more of a cone than a basket in terms of your investment, isn't it?
Yeah. So we've got to bring players through the door. If we don't bring players through the door, the club have basically from the top have gone right. We're going down basically, because you've got basically how I look at it is the money you get relegated from the Championship to League One, the amount of money you lose from TV revenue is big. So is it worth losing that money, or is it worth maybe paying over the odds for a player just so you don't go down? So that's what I think we're at that point now where we've maybe have to overspend, maybe just take our beliefs and morals and put it to one side for a second and go, right, we need to bring in we need to just spend.
That's almost what we did with Des Buckingham, really, wasn't it? In a managerial sense, we sort of looked at it and went, right, there's a real emotional connection with this guy. There's a feeling that what he stood for and what he did for Oxford was so impressive, and that's why it felt controversial, because of his I guess his beliefs and his relationship with the fan base. But I say we at the time, it wasn't a we, it was more the Oxford United board making that decision. We pulled the trigger and said, look, we need to prioritise this season, because we need to understand that the drop off in the long term is far more important than the short term. We might have to take a short term hit for a long term success or for long-term stability. But if you are very, very stuck in a model or stuck in a strategy, that can be really difficult. And almost that's what happened with Rob Edwards, wasn't it? It was a case of, right, we're going to keep hold of him because we believe this guy's done so much. But sometimes you've got to make a difficult decision early. I think Sir Alex Ferguson said this, something along the lines of make a difficult decision early, because if you try and make them late, you can get caught. Not a direct quote, as you can probably imagine. You can get caught chasing. And if you get caught chasing with bad decisions and with difficult decisions, suddenly that list gets longer and longer and longer. It feels as though Luton have sort of been chasing those calls all season. And there could be a lot of regret come the end of it. And you never want to end the season with regret. And at the moment, Luton look to be on a path to quite a regretful summer, next summer, that is.
Well, yeah, when you make a decision like those, like the Oxford board did, you've got to back it up, and you backed it up by bringing in an established Championship manager. Our board have come out and said, right, we're going to go for a promotion this season, but then didn't back it up in the summer transfer window. So, you've got to back it up. And if I'm being honest with you, I've witnessed 4 relegations in my lifetime, and I'm 25 years old. And if we get relegated this year, it's the most avoidable one out of them all. So it's something which we've got. It's kind of like, we're on that thin ice right now, and we've got to make the right decisions quick. With it being less than a week left of this January transfer window, I just hope we can do it. But there's a lot of concerns right now.
Understandably so. A concerning moment, I think, for Luton Town. Lewis, thanks so much for joining us, and look forward to catching up with you later in the season.
Hopefully we stay up when I'm saying when I'm talking to you. Fingers crossed.
Cheers, take care, mate.
Cheers.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks to Argyle Life, Green and White, Jack Ward and Gab and Ward. Wow, thank you. Wow. So delighted to be joined now by Jack Bryan from the Rams Review podcast. Good evening, Jack. How are you, mate?
Oh, good, thanks. I mean, it's Derby not so much, but I'm all right. So that's something, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, probably the fine margins went against you in terms of the 2-1 loss at Cardiff, because you had a goal disallowed, and there were 1 or 2 things that, where you put away chances or fine margins, and you just maybe, goalkeeping from Zetterstrom. that went against you a little bit. But I think in the bigger picture, it's 5-6 defeats on the spin now for Derby County. So were you concerned about your championship status?
I think you have to be. I think if you look at what Derby has done in the last month, it's 6 league defeats on the trot and a penalty shootout defeat to Leyton Orient to miss out on a money-spinning tie at home to Manchester City in the 4th round of the FA Cup. This is now over a month since the last league point. It's a dire run that, if it continues, Derby will certainly go down. They are kind of sleepwalking towards it at this moment in time, and I think this next week is going to be huge. At the moment, there's all this talk around Aaron Cashin, who obviously is only a couple of games back from injury, but potentially could be off to Brighton. Now, the club categorically weren't selling him last week, but now the talk is from local media, from BBC Local Radio and from the local paper, that his head has been turned and the club would sell for an acceptable fee, but there's a big gap in valuation. So whether that can be met in the next week will be interesting. And it's then about how much time Derby have to reinvest that as well. So I think at the moment, Paul Warne is dealing with a bit of an injury crisis. Against Sunderland in midweek last week, Kane Wilson and Dejan Brown both go off with hamstring issues. The day before that, Curtis Nelson's ruled out for the season. And then on Saturday again, Corey Blackett-Taylor gets a start. At last, fans have been crying out for that. You'll never guess what happened to him. Another hamstring issue. So this was a squad that already needed reinforcements and is now pretty threadbare. So it's a difficult position for Derby. And I said to you in the WhatsApp yesterday, I think this is a huge week and a potentially season-defining one.
Yeah, I did a video on the 3 teams that got promoted. Obviously, Derby included in that, and I did do it. I do worry about Derby. I do. I think there's a real feel that it's almost becoming quite stale. Jack, if that's a word to describe it, it feels quite stale. And it feels as though you use the phrase sleepwalking. It does. Your best run was at the start of the season, and now suddenly you start looking at the form table, you start looking at the performances, and there's a real level of concern. I mean, I did a bit of digging. You got the 3rd oldest squad in the championship, which is not unusual for a Paul Warne side. But when you start picking up injuries, and that squad does become quite bare, and when you do have that, you're sort of looking around for that bit of stardust. You're looking around for a game changer. You're Blackett-Taylor as an option there, and you say he's been injured in his first game back after being called into things, and that's a real problem. You're sort of looking at that squad and you're like, we're actually running out of players to try something a little bit different. And everyone sort of speaks about Paul Warne as this sort of almost one-dimensional manager, and that comes its pros and cons. You stuck by him last season and you reap the rewards. You got that promotion under his belt and he was quite stubborn in the way that he approached things. But you look at the amount of players you've played. You're back three in your last game, and it could have been more than that. Didn't actually include one of your players that is your most used back three or defensive options. You had 2 fullbacks and Ebba Adams playing there. And you start looking at that and you're like, right, we're actually now in formations and in key areas of the pitch. And we know Paul Warne does rely on those defenders to be quite robust. You can't actually play any defenders there or natural defenders. And then you're getting in this quite vicious cycle. According to Y Scout, and this could be wrong, and I imagine formations and systems can be quite misleading, but you've had a variation of over 5 formations this season. And because you are just sort of shoehorning players into different areas, and that's because that squad is so thin. A real level of concern around Derby. 1 away win this season. The only stand that you've got there, and that could change the fact that Curtis Nelson's now injured and Cashin could be on his way out, is that set pieces do continue to be a threat. 40% of your goals have come from set pieces this season. That seems to be the shining light. But beyond that, in open play, there's a real concern there that you are trying things for trying's sake, simply because not so much tactically, but actually you're being forced into it through availability. And that's never nice and never ideal for a manager. And suddenly, when those Derby fans do turn, and when there is an element of, I use the word toxic quite carefully, but when you start feeling that fans aren't buying into this manager in this way, suddenly things can go downhill. And all of a sudden, you're in that bottom three with 27 points, with 6 straight defeats, 7 in all competitions, and things look quite bleak. No clean sheets in the last 8 either. There's some really quite worrying stats there, Jack, and a set of metrics that don't make for good reading at the business end of the campaign.
Yeah, I think it's bleaker than that in a lot of ways. Because if you go back, we're talking about 4 wins in 25. And
that's not good.
That is relegation form for certain, right? I think the 3 wins in the first 5 games, those 3 home wins, definitely helped Derby maybe paper over the cracks a little bit, because Friday night was the first time they dropped into the relegation zone since the opening weekend, which is remarkable with that run of form. I think, Curtis Nelson's loss was obviously a massive blow at that back 3. Derby decided to err on the side of caution with Cashin against Sunderland. With him now off, I mean, Derby are going to need to sign 2 centre-backs to stand still.
Yeah.
Effectively, before we even look at improvement.
Which Craig Forsyth does.
That makes such a huge week. I mean, the one...
So.
Yes, that's. I mean, I can't talk, to be fair, but I think, yeah, that is the thing. I mean, he is being relied upon after more than a decade, after 3 ACL injuries, and yes, he's been dependable for an awfully long time, but that guy is getting on, and again, I think that shows the lack of depth and so on. But really, I think the hope has to be that they can find more Lars Jørgen Seldersons, the new Norwegian striker, the target man that Paul Warne has wanted for 2.5 years, who got a goal at the weekend, looked really bright when he came on against Sunderland as well, despite not having played since the 1st of December because of the Eliteserien season ending in December on the winter calendar, summer calendar, sorry. And I think, he seems like the exact profile that Paul Warne has wanted for a long time. Having players that fit like a glove like that is going to be the way that Derby can pull themselves out of this. But I think you look at, I think Kane Wilson was a really gutting blow. So I think he's been one of the few bright sparks in terms of actually wanting to attack, progress the ball up the pitch. And Corey Blackett-Taylor, actually, in that respect, he played right wing back on Saturday, which seems a bit rogue. But I think the logic behind that was perhaps, although it's not his best position, he could use attributes somewhat similar to Wilson in terms of leading the charge for Derby and getting on the pitch. He's the only other player who has numbers similar or better than Kane Wilson in terms of things like progressive carries. And, there is
he's a speedster,
nobody fit in that squad right now that can drive a team up the pitch like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So Jack, my question, I suppose, would be on the one hand, and this is what I'm a little bit concerned about. I have reservations about Paul Warne as a manager at this level because he's coming up against coaches like Danny Röhl at Sheffield Wednesday or like Ruben Sellers at Hull, just to give you 2 examples, who have been studying, honing their coaching craft for 20 odd years at a really advanced level and have really earned that opportunity in the Championship. Now, I'm not saying that Paul Warne's achievements in League One, which is 4 promotions, haven't earned him that opportunity. But I think at Championship level, there is a bit of a question mark about whether he can stand up to those kind of tacticians. The flip side of that, it's probably a bottom 6 squad on paper going into the season, and with the injury crisis you could make that a bottom 3 squad, which you could argue maybe just needs better players when you're having to rely on Craig Forsyth, who personally, with all respect to him as a professional and as a stalwart for Derby County, isn't up to the level. He's not had a target man in the first half of the season until, as you mentioned there, the injuries that, to Kane Wilson and to Corey Blackett-Taylor, they don't help. David Ozo, of course, as well. But yeah, I'm kind of in 2 minds about it, but I'm also wondering whether Warne is really sort of maximising his resources, and that's really what you would ask your manager to do.
Yeah, this is the question that's been dividing Derby fans for a number of months, and the tide does seem to have shifted online at least. I wrote after the the Leyton Orient debacle that things risked getting toxic if the discourse online was replicated in the stands. He then got booed off as he was completing a kind of laugh of applause showing appreciation to the fans after the Watford game. I think, Sunderland brought that bit of appreciation of the injury crisis he was suddenly dealing with. But, I think that is the question. I mean, obviously at the start of the season, everyone's going, well, at Rotherham, he didn't have much to work with. How much can you judge him based off of that? At Derby, similarly, they don't have a huge budget compared to most of the league, but it is more than he would have had to work with at Rotherham. So the questions certainly are being asked, and questions being asked about the structure at the club. Obviously, 2.5 years out of administration, there isn't kind of footballing people on the board aside from the manager, really. And that's something I know we're going to delve into on the podcast this week. But I think it's a difficult position for Derby, where obviously David Clowes isn't loaded compared to most owners in the second tier. But does he need to perhaps throw a little bit of money at it to try and survive in the hope of then getting some investment? Because that investment only comes if Derby stay in the Championship. And that's something that I think Curtis Nelson's injury has maybe pushed him into a little bit.
So, Jack, what do you think? What would you say if we had to ask you whether Derby are going to beat the drop this season? What would you go with?
Do you know what? At the start of the season, I did a massive piece for the website where I said it's going to be a scrappy 21st. And, in that respect, it's remarkable that this is the first time they've been in the drop zone since the opening weekend. But right now, on the current trajectory, with little sign of too many players coming, apart from maybe Matt Clark, which is rumoured, I think
it'd be a decent signing, Matt Clark.
I think in a week's time, he would. Former Derby Player of the Year, of course, in his previous loan spells. Left-footed centre-back, points to cash in leading again, perhaps. But I think, at the moment, with what's going on, I've not seen enough that's concrete yet to be able to say they'll stop this slide and stay up. Hopefully, for their sake, in a week's time, they've made some good deals, the transfer window shuts, sat going, yeah, they've got enough. But right now, I think it's difficult to say that they will.
Well, there you go. Tough last 20-odd games of the season that in store then for Derby County. Jack, thanks so much for joining us, and keep up the great work on the Rams Review.
Cheers, mate.
Top man, Jack. So we had a video contribution from the Green and White podcast and Argyle Life of Joe Bell. Here's what he had to say earlier today.
Hi, Gab. How do I sum up the last few weeks for Argyle? It's not easy. I remember being on with you guys last time and saying that we need to give Wayne Rooney a chance. He needs a transfer window, etc. And it's all gone a bit awry since then. The change needed to happen. Look, we all wanted it to work, and with every will in the world, it just wasn't happening, was it? And with such an important transfer window and busy period of games coming up, we had to make the change. Miran Muslic has come in, and it's clear he's taking no prisoners. He's not going to stand for any nonsense within the dressing room. And he wants warriors, he wants fighters. And the first 3 games have been tricky. But as he said himself after Saturday's draw at the Stadium of Light, it was a proof of life, and that needs to be backed up now at home against West Brom in a week's time. The important thing, for the first time since Miron's been in the building, he'll have a free week. As he said himself, more games than training sessions he's had since he's come in the door, with recovery days, etc. after games. So it's been a really challenging period for him. We got some injured players coming back, which will be a massive help. Mohamed Tijani, you'd think, will be more suited to Miran Muslic's style of play than Ryan Hardy will be. The issue is obviously the lack of transfer activity. Michael Baidoo coming in on the first day of the window effectively, but that was a deal agreed back in the summer. We couldn't get it over the line at that period. We've obviously got in Timotej Pukac as well, the left wing back, who's having to cover at left centre back at the moment, hoping to get this Ukrainian lad over the line at some point in the coming days, which will help. But we're still going to be 3-4 players short. It's going to be a busy week. It's going to be a busy end to the transfer window. But we're going to have to try and get as many bodies in as we can. It's 7 points. It's a lot to ask of, but once we get West Brom out of the way, the fixture list perhaps becomes a little bit easier, if not the fact the games take on extra significance given where the teams are around us. So we are still very much behind the 8 ball. If I had to give us much of a chance at the moment, I probably wouldn't. I think we've a lot of ground to make up after a poor start. So a lot of pressure on the upcoming weeks, but look, if we can show the same sort of life we did on Saturday, then we'll give ourselves a real chance. Sorry I can't be there on the show tonight, but I look forward to speaking to you and going in depth in a few weeks. Cheers all.
If I had to give us much of a chance, I probably wouldn't. Joe Bell, 2025. No, look, thanks so much, Joe. Really appreciate your insight on Plymouth Argyle. Jack, I wanted to come on to you about Argyle, because that performance at Sunderland, it looked like they were very strong out possession. It looked like there was an element of defiance in the aftermath of Morgan Whittaker's exit and the controversy around that. Do you think that gives them a glimmer of hope, even bearing in mind they still have a lot to do?
It does. I think it does give them a glimmer, because it's a point that came with a performance away from home against a team that are doing very, very well and doing better than Plymouth in simple terms. It does feel, though, too little too late, to be honest. If I'm being truthful and being as brutally honest as I can be, I think it does feel as though it's a good performance for a new manager, because it gives him that almost that building block, and that first building block, and you sort of go, right, that's the level, right, that's the standard. If you perform like that against at home against a team down there, for example, that should theoretically provide 3 points instead of just 1, but that isn't how football works. And sometimes games like that, when there isn't a pressure, there isn't an expectation, everybody thought that Sunderland were going to win that game comfortably. It's much easier, I think, to sort of go there, approach it as a free hit and put a really, really strong, robust, positively aggressive performance in there. But it's the games against the opposition that they need to be beating, that they're a real issue with. And I think that's the problem I have with Plymouth, that they are just second best in the majority of games, and they do look like a team that is just far too easy to play against. I mean, against Oxford, I thought I watched them play in their first game under the new manager, and even in that one, they just looked a little bit soft, I thought. And they got a point out of that game, but they did feel a bit soft. They did feel like they were playing through the motion slightly, and that isn't what you want from a manager. We all saw that first meeting that went viral on social media. He does seem like this quite... he's a very demanding guy. He's a passionate, demanding man. But he can only do so much. The bottom line is he's coming in and inheriting a side that are in woeful form, and they're in a very, very difficult place. And again, that then correlates with the recruitment too. I saw the centre back they're trying to get hold of. I think that might still be going ahead, but there was a period there where that pool is difficult. It's far easier to recruit when you've got when you're in a position where you can almost convince somebody. And at the moment,
it's like Hull signing Louis Barry, for instance. They've got a run of form. They're up to 19th. It's a little bit easier to get him.
I think that sometimes doesn't get spoken about enough. When you go into January window, you sort of go, right, this is why you should sign. And that can sound quite basic, but I think that does play a part. It really does, because you're looking at that and you go, all right, well, I could go to Plymouth now, or I could go to wait till the summer and look at a project in a completely different light. Do you want to come into a team that are rock bottom of the league with very little going for them? What are they on now? 22 points. They are still 7 points. Yeah, 7 points adrift. It's quite difficult to sort of build something. You can have all of the charisma in the world, and he got me. Definitely, if I was a Plymouth player, I think I was ready to run through brick walls for the guy. But the bottom line is, you're still in a position where you are adrift. That squad is a bottom 3 squad, and it needs a real injection. But that guy that comes with great passion and great I use the word again, that aura, can't kick the football for them. He can't do that for them. That has to come from within. And we saw glimpses of that against Sunderland, but you then got to be able to go and do that again, purely. I don't know if they played at home. I'm not as clued up on the Plymouth fixture list, but you've got to then go do that against a Derby at home, or a Cardiff at home, or you've got to go to Derby and put in that same type of performance you did against Sunderland. And that's where they're struggling. You can do that at Sunderland and you can wear the point and feel great about it, but you've got to then go back and look at that league table again and go, right, we've still got to pick up 7 points here just to actually get to where, the lid, almost a relegation lid, cuts off, with teams also playing games of football too. You're chasing, you're climbing, and that's not nice. I didn't really ever get the Wayne Rooney appointment at the start of the season, to be honest, and I think that's almost the regret that they're sort of feeling now.
I agree. I think also, like that, as much as I do take some encouragement from Argyle from that performance at Sunderland, where I think they got the balance spot on between cover and pressing, where they put enough with Wright and Hardy and Bundu, put enough pressure against Sunderland's defence whilst also covering themselves. Out of possession. I think getting that balance right is pretty impressive from an out of possession point of view, and they still carried that threat. So well done to them for that. That's got to be a springboard, because if we've agreed that it's going to take at least 50 points to stay up in the Championship this season, which I'm feeling pretty strong about that, then we've got to say that Plymouth Argyle are going to need 28 points from their remaining 17 games, and that's to give them a chance. And 28 points from 17 games, off the top of my head, I think will be playoff form, or borderline that. So I think basically it has to be a springboard for something, because there's the gap 7 points, but also the point tally that I think is going to be required. So still an uphill challenge for.
I think the point that almost back up the point about when the backs are against the wall a little bit. They're best. They went to Brentford and beat them 1-0, and then got a point against Sunderland away from home in 2-2. But then they lost at home to QPR 1-0. I know QPR are in a good vein of form and still. Have done a great job of actually climbing themselves out of this conversation. But you've got a 1-0 win away from home where nobody gave you a chance, a 2-2 draw where nobody gave you a chance, and you got battered 5-0 by Burnley. Again, a good team, but you can't be conceding 5 goals at home. And the way that went about, they were 4-0 down at half time. That just is not acceptable. And for a guy that comes with great pedigree from abroad, but also comes in with a real sense of the word, it's a demand, isn't it? He's got that real. He's got. It's hard to explain. It's other than the aura, isn't it? It's that feel of like, right, I'm going to give you everything here. I'm going to be all in on you, but you need to give something back. And suddenly, in games since he's come in, we've seen glimpses of it, but not enough. He's still searching for that first league win, and that needs to come quickly, because you cannot try and, like you say there, if you've got 50 points, you've got to try and get to, and you're currently on 22. Is it 22? That's a lot of points to pick up, and you can only do that, again, stating the obvious, by winning games of football, and that looks to be a real struggle for them at the moment.
Certainly does. I'm wondering about Stoke City, Jack, because one thing I particularly wanted, we weren't able to get the views of a Stoke City fan on this evening, but I wanted to ask you about the 0-0 draw at home to your side, Oxford United. They only had 7 shots all game, and Mark Robins only made 1 substitution, which I thought was slightly odd. Now, I don't know if you were able to get your eyes on that game, or whether you
did watch it.
You did watch it, yeah. Are you surprised that Mark Robins didn't make more than 1 change in the second half?
I am, and simply because I thought that maybe it comes down to is that an underlying statement to the board to say that we need reinforcements? Often managers do tend to do that in January. They sort of make statements like that to go, right, I need some help here because I want to make changes. I want to win this game. But I'm looking behind me and I'm not quite sure who's able to do that. That could perhaps be a reason for it. And also because I think Stoke felt that game was one they should be winning. I know Oxford United came into this game and actually now after that game continue this unbeaten run. But you look at the XG of 0.39. Did I ever really think that they were going to score? Maybe on one or maybe 2 occasions do they have good chances. But again, you're looking at a team here that are low of confidence, and that's why when we're speaking about a relegation battle, a lot of it comes down to what can the basics be done to a good level, and then can you use that as a springboard? I thought their actual performance itself was okay. I think it is okay. But yeah, you look at that bench and you go, there were options there, but only making one change in the 68th minute doesn't doesn't shout and scream as a manager that is looking to make aggressive changes to win a game of football. I don't think Stoke were that bad, actually. I thought they looked okay. Did they ever look like winning the game? I'm not so sure. But they definitely look like a far. What Morris needs to come in and do straight away. You see these new managers is come in and almost sort of start from back to front a little bit, build a base and build a foundation. I think from that side of things, you're lucky you've got one of the best goalkeepers in the league for that to happen, by the way.
Although he did have his moment, didn't he, Victor Johansson?
He did have his moment. I think if I'm being, if I'm going to play, on the fair game here, I would say the ball did go out of play, but it would have counted. There's no VAR in the Championship, so the goal would have stood. He did have his moment, but he also made some really good saves in the game. I think a result on the whole, a point isn't unjust for either team. If you had to pick a winner, I think I would say we had the better opportunity to do it. I think we should have scored that chance, for example, and there were efforts. But I thought they defended pretty well. I think they defended pretty well. Did they offer loads going forward? No, but maybe that's the game plan was almost about, right, let's go back to understanding what we need to do first and foremost. And that's building a stable back four and a stable base, and then that will come with time. But have they got time? This league is pretty brutal.
Certainly is, yeah. I think Ash Phillips is probably the one player for Stoke City that I'm quite excited about, and he certainly looks like a big positive for them in terms of their chances of beating the drop. But certainly some work to do going forward, and I'd like to see more from the likes of the loans, Kumas and Moran, because they're probably a bit quiet on Saturday, and they need a bit more service for Nathan Lowe to replicate his brilliant form for Walsall in League Two in the Championship, which is a little bit of a step up, isn't it? So in terms of, just to kind of circle back, we'll be joined by our Cardiff City fan in a few minutes, but just to sort of reflect on the teams we've discussed so far, Jack. Are you? It's funny, we've spoken to three fans who are all quite pessimistic about their chance of beating the drop.
I feel it's quite a depressing show, Gab. I actually feel I'm in quite good spirits generally with Oxford United, but I feel like I'm now questioning everything.
Yeah, has it made you feel more optimistic about Oxford United staying up, given how little optimism there is in the Derby County camp and the Luton Town camp and Plymouth Argyle?
Yeah, I come back to the points at the start. It's about the current state of play is what fans have to almost digest in the moment, isn't it? And I think that's where Derby fans are. They're in a really bad place. Hence the quite depressing conversation we had with Jack, and same with Lewis and at Luton and Plymouth. We all know from the start of the season it's not been a great season whatsoever, and there hasn't been many positives to take away from it. Yeah, I do have those. I do think it maybe has improved my my feeling towards it, simply because I know our current state of play is much brighter, and there are teams in worse positions, and losing habits are a thing as much as winning habits. I spoke to Lewis about. So, yeah, I think it has. I think it does, and I think the manager. We had this conversation, I think, probably a year ago when we spoke about League One, and managers are a massive impact into that. How do you currently feel about your manager? How do you currently feel about him in situations like this? If you went through every team that are in this conversation, has a manager been there before and dealt with this situation? Is the current vibe a good one with your manager? You look at Plymouth, I think we're quite unsure. Luton, we're quite unsure. Derby, it doesn't look very bright. Pompey will speak about John Mousinho later. Stoke, we're still unsure. Hull, you feel as though their window has been quite progressive, and Sellers is a good manager, and only recently has the form sort of improved. Cardiff do look good in recent weeks, but then Swansea, they've had a real fall off, and suddenly they're in that conversation.
Can I just ask you about Swansea then, Jack? Because I don't know whether we'd sort of could we include them in this mixture now? Because on the one hand, you've got this team that shipped 4 at Portsmouth and it shipped 5 at Norwich, and generally has been defensively sort of wide open in recent weeks. And yet, the main sort of saving grace this season under Luke Williams has been their in possession game. So they've got Matt Grimes at the base of midfield, who's been possibly the most reliable playmaker at this level over the last 5 years or so. They've got Gonçalo Franco, who they recruited from Portugal. They've got Jackie, who's looked quite bright going forward. And yet, defensively, they've been wide open at times. So if they lose Matt Grimes, who's their kind of conductor of the orchestra, their in possession game's going to take a hit, and there's nothing to say that their out of possession game's going to improve, because that's not really an area of Luke Williams's work that I'm super high on. So I'm a little bit worried about Swansea, given they've still got another 17 plus points to tick off.
Yeah, and it's amazing, isn't it? Football is so ever changing, and a league table, and you can suddenly have a feeling about a football club, and that can change within just a couple of weeks. If you'd have asked me about after that 3-0 win over QPR and that 2-1 win against Luton, and they were sort of knocking on the door of that top 10, you go, right, Swansea, there's always a chance that a team can make a late push to the top 6. And we always know, I think with Luke Williams, you've got, like you say there, a really, really quite progressive manager. You've got somebody who wants to play a really good brand of football. Is there a plan B to it? Is there a defensive side of their game that they can dig in matches? I mean, evidently not in the last couple of weeks. They were far too easy against Norwich, far too open in those moments. Sheffield United having a red card and losing that game is not easy, and we know how good Sheffield United can be. But that Derby defeat against Cardiff is a massive, massive blow and a real killer. Yeah, I agree with you. I think at the moment they just look a little bit. I use the word, and it's not my favourite word to use, but a little bit flappy. They look a little bit unsure as to what they're good at, and that can be quite dangerous. And when you win games, you're so certain in what you're doing. You're so certain in this way that Luke Williams wants you to play. Okay, when that doesn't work, can you go, right, what at least we can do is dig in and defend? It might not be pretty, but have we got another option? Have we got something to fall back on? Have we got a body of work that isn't the football that Luke Williams wants to play every single week that we can sort of go to? And I don't think at the moment you can. Defensively, there are frailties. Against Pompey nearly a month ago, they looked really, really, really poor defensively. If you don't have that, you feel like it doesn't click for Swansea for too much of the game, you can get dragged into a really ugly encounter where you're shipping far too many goals. And does that come down to maybe not having an alternative option tactically that you can sort of fall back on? If it is sometimes with Luke Williams, one way or nothing. And when you sort of lose a game quite heavily, and that continues to become a pattern, you suddenly start looking around and feel quite concerned. But they're 17th in the league, and unfortunately, are they in the conversation? Well, I'm afraid football is as true as its league table. If you're putting Preston and Oxford just in that conversation, and we're talking about current form and the current feel around a football club, I think you have to put Swansea in there. I don't think they are in my bottom 3, but you have to put them in that conversation, because you lose, and you continue to lose the number of games they're losing in the manner they're doing it. Then they definitely are. There's teams below them that are in better form. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely, yeah. I think instinctively I didn't arrange a Swansea fan to come on the podcast because I didn't mentally have them in that bracket. But now I feel like we're talking ourselves into Swansea being in that conversation. So it's going to be very interesting to see, what they do in the next 7 days, whether they sell Matt Grimes and whether they can fix some of those defensive issues. Because I've always known Luke Williams is a great in possession coach. I loved it. He got rave reviews at Swindon, sort of behind the scenes there. Brilliant stuff at MK Dons, kickstarting Russ Martin's career. Really good work at Notts County as well, where actually in the National League, the out of possessions work from Luke Williams was pretty good. But then at Notts County, there are a few question marks. And I think once the issues start to seep in, I don't know how good a troubleshooter Luke Williams is. So that's a bit of a question mark for me. And I think I'd probably rather have, in a relegation battle, I'd rather have a great out of possession coach, which sort of lends me on to Nathaniel Whitto of the Hull and Back podcast, because one of the things that I really like about Ruben Sellers' work, Nathaniel, good evening, is the way that his sides are always so aggressive against the ball. And I look at that 3-0 victory at Sheffield United. When you were leading 1-0 in the second half, you continued to try and put some pressure against the ball, and that gave your defence a lot of respite, where other teams might have tried to drop back and soak up pressure and maybe invite it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, good evening, you two. Always insulted to be on the relegation podcast, of course. Much preferred when I was in the playoff one. Of course, very good time for me to be on here because of the fantastic win against Sheffield United. Probably one of the most, well, I'd say perhaps the most surprising result in the Championship so far, because it's not just a win, but it's a win that we fully deserved. I know we didn't have as much of the ball, but as you say, out of possession, we were incredible. Neil Warnock on Sky was very happy with the grit and determination we put in, as you would expect from him. And on the ball, we're much improved, and off the ball, we still have a bit to work on because the defending from crosses hasn't been so good. But that's probably mostly been Ryan Giles and Louis Coyle, who's out with injury. So McLaughlin, sort of makeshift left back, and Drame being a bit improved, and but probably just one result away from maybe thinking, we're not going to be going down. It's a big weekend, as you may have discussed already. A lot of difficult matches for all the clubs at the bottom. And we've got what you would like to think is a winnable game against Stoke. So hopefully, if I do come on again, it'll be in the sort of bang average mid-table one.
Nathaniel, one thing that really excites me about Ruben Sellers, and I appreciate it's a small sample size for your fans because you've not seen loads of him, of his work, but what I love is that he started coaching at 16, so he's had 25 years, quarter of a century's worth of coaching experience to kind of hone his craft. And I think when it comes to a conversation about managers, I always feel like that's an area, like their history, their coaching background is often an area that kind of goes under recognized, because you've got Luton appointing a manager in Matt Bloomfield on the basis of one good year. Like even at the start of Matt Bloomfield's Wickham tenure, it's not like he hit the ground running straight away. And he only very recently stopped playing in order to start coaching. So it feels like they're appointing him on a pretty relatively small sample size, whereas Hull are appointing Ruben Sellers on this long coaching career where he's had loads of time to perfect his way of doing things in terms of pressing against the ball. He seems to be very big on, and in terms of strategy when it comes to that, and basically refining his processes. And that, for me, I would always, 100 times over, I would rather have someone who spent their whole adult career working as a coach to someone that's spent their whole adult career as a player and then adapting to being a coach. It's just makes it makes total sense to everyone in any other industry, and in football, for some reason, that doesn't get picked up on as much, I don't think.
Yeah, because I think he's coached not only in two countries, which is impressive, because a lot of managers haven't done that in England, but two continents, and I think maybe about 5 to 10 different countries. And he's managed in the Premier League, where there's so much pressure and exposure. I mean, also at Reading, where some weeks he's not being paid. And it's the complete opposite. So, and compare that to Tim Walter, who's only managed in Germany and hasn't actually achieved promotion in Germany as well with Hamburg, who are a big club. It's like if Leeds didn't go up this season, perhaps that would be a failure. Same with Walter. Ruben Sayers is a much more complete person. And that is what you said, you want someone who's a good off-the-ball coach, but also off the pitch to motivate the players in a relegation battle. Maybe Walter, when things are going well, specifically in Germany with that system, that could go okay, but he was never going to get us out of a rut that he'd put us into with his arrogance and stubbornness, whereas Sayers is so much more likable, and that will really help a young sort of malleable young set of players. It might help attract some players, that we might talk about in just a second, with, of course, big news today. And it's just nice to have him as a manager compared to someone that I'm kind of, I really don't like at all. And, he seems to care about the fans and the club. And his background is far more interesting and varied. And he's been through a lot more different experiences than our last manager was.
Yeah, the performance against Oxford United a long time ago with Tim Walter looked really, really bleak. I think that was the writing was on the wall. I think during that period too, I think both teams were going into that game with a really, really bad run of form. And since then, I think we've actually both had an upturn in form, which is great to see. Yeah, I was really impressed with that game against Sheffield United. I watched it, and I was so impressed with the fact you mentioned at the start that you didn't maybe have the majority of possession, but you controlled the game without the ball, and that's a real asset. And that comes with a manager that. Like you say, has had very, very different scenarios and had very, very different cultural experiences within football clubs. And you can win games by not having the majority of the ball. And it'd be naive to try and go to Sheffield United and dominate possession, but you can still be extremely effective on the break. I mean, your goals did come from really strong counter-attacking moves. And if you've got the players that can do that, and you've got players like Kamara, for example, who's really come to life since that really difficult period that he had.
A little bit. As
a pure example of somebody that can play to those strengths, you're looking in a much better place. You got to play to the strength of that squad, and you say that the overwhelming feel is it's a young squad, and it's a squad that does need nurturing and does need time. And you've got Sellers who's worked with a young squad in far worse circumstances than this. And like you say, we just spoke about Plymouth and attracting players. It's far easier to attract players like the likes of Louis Barry when you're in a good position in the league table, when you're in a field, purely on form basis, not 19th as a great one for Hull, but the form looks good, or looks much better. And a manager that's got a great track record of developing players and almost developing them in a short amount of time and a long period of time too, whether that be even a loan or a permanent deal. So, there's a real feel about Hull at the moment that things could be on the up, and I'm happy for them.
He's just a Spanish Liam Rosenior, really. It just makes you think, why did we go through the whole Tim Volta experiment? Because it was doomed to fail, and I think we wanted Sayers at some point in the summer. We could have saved us all the time and effort and just gone from then.
I don't think he's a Spanish Liam Rosenior. I think Rosenior was a bit more patient in possession, whereas I think I would say that Ruben Sellers is less afraid to sort of go forward early, and maybe that's a bit more in line with what the owner Ajin Ilagela wants. We know that you're keen to talk about Louis Barry, then, Nathaniel. So
how could you tell?
You must be really excited. He's absolutely ripped up in League One in the first half of the season. Brings a real flair and unpredictability and skill and craft and guile to the left of a front three. You must be absolutely buzzing to have him hopefully in the door.
Well, yeah, I was going to say I am extremely excited about this. Should I be? I would think that anyone who scored 18 goals, well, really in any league, let alone League One, which I know is in recent years has improved a whole lot, especially with the position we are. From a Aston Villa standpoint, I can understand why he wouldn't want to go to a club, or they wouldn't want to send him to Celtic, for example, because I assume he wouldn't play as much. But, it's a bit of... No one's ever too good to go down, but it's a bit of overkill for us to get Louis Barry, considering that we only want to stay up. Because if we have a great season or a season that's just about good enough to stay up, it doesn't really make much difference. I think the option to buy, if there is one, or another loan next summer would be better. But wingers have been a problem position after Miller and Bellumi have gone out. So it's exactly what we need.
Really impressive, Louis Barry. That signing does feel really ambitious. I think it's always nice when you get a player that you feel all window has been linked to every other football club, and that's always a good sign, right? It's when we know what he did at Stockport. The question mark there will be he's only done it at Stockport. Sorry to sort of burst the bubble slightly, but it's the truth that you need that Stockport Louis Barry, because that's the one that was fit and firing. But I mentioned earlier, you want wide options, you want natural creators and players that can play in that way. We know what Sellers had at Reading with Nibs and players like that, and those wide options that have done great work in the formation that he wants to play. The wide players are crucial, and players with output are even more important. And if you look at Louis Barry, he does both of those things. He can bring you up the pitch, and he can do magical things in those dangerous areas of the football pitch. And if you're going to do that at Hull, perhaps in those 3 or 4 occasions in games where you have got to take a slightly different approach in the match, Sheffield United, an example of that, you've got a player there that can certainly do it. So it's a really good signing. And I think actually it's always a good indication when you look at Louis Barry and you go, could he have maybe gone somewhere a little bit different in terms of a league position in the Championship? But he's coming to Hull City, and that screams ambition. Again, we'll talk about lifting a group. And I think someone like Louis Barry can lift a group because his players aren't silly. They'll be looking at Louis Barry and going, right, okay, we signed a player here that was absolutely brilliant in League One for 2 seasons. And this season has had a very, very good campaign. Clearly got a future at Aston Villa because of the long contract that he signed before he's left. So, yeah, there's a real buzz, there's a real feeling about them. And we spoke about earlier, Gab, or these teams in terms of vibe and in terms of a natural feel around a football club. That can play a huge part. And January's a great opportunity to do that when you can recruit a player of the pedigree and of the ability of Louis Barry. So a fantastic addition and definitely fits the model and fits the tactical model that Sellers is trying to build and has already shown he can build in a short amount of time at Hull City.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nathaniel, we're quite grateful to you because much of our podcast so far has been speaking to fans who are very pessimistic about their prospects.
I was last week. I was after the QPR game, certainly.
So it's been nice to hear a more positive fan. So with that in mind, presumably you're feeling pretty hopeful that you can climb the table. Is a top half finish, on the cards possibly? Because that would certainly put you in great spirits for the following campaign, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I certainly think so. I think this is sort of a stupid statement, but no matter what division we're in next season, I think we will have a chance at promotion, which is a ridiculous thing to say.
Well, in the Premier League, that's not what the system is, Nathaniel.
Well, no, I don't think we're going to get promoted. But if we go down or stay up, I think we'll probably, if we go down, we are going to destroy League One, so long as we don't go bust completely financially.
Or lose Sellers.
Well, indeed. But then again, Adrian is one of the only owners like Rossini where Sayers would be the perfect man to get us promoted. But because we've spent all this money, he'd probably sack him. So it wouldn't really work. Top half finish. I guess that's on if Barry can hit the ground running. It's in our hands. If we go down, it'll be because of our terrible home form. There's only about 4 or 5 clubs in the whole 92 that have a worse home record than we do. And I think even if we were to win our next 2 matches and how condensed those home away form tables are, because there's fewer games, we'd still be bottom. We've got to play Stoke, Derby, Luton, Plymouth, Coventry, Preston, Norwich, Stoke at home. So the best team we have to play, I think, is Norwich, who are not very good away from home. They're 11th or 12th. So it's in our hands. I'm just when you're going into games like Sheffield United and you think we've got a better chance to win here than QPR, that is a weird situation. It was the same last year. You do think we've got enough, and we will get a few of those wins.
You'd have taken 3 points from QPR and Sheffield United, though, so which way around it comes. Nathaniel, great to get your insight on. Looks like Hull City, whilst the home form isn't ideal, you put yourself in a good position to start steadily climbing the table. So great to see you're sort of back on an upward curve, and look forward to catching up with you later in the season.
Okay, thank you very much.
Nathaniel, take care, mate. Thank you.
Legend. Cheers, mate. Delighted to be joined now by Jack Hancock of Hancock Analysis. Jack, thanks so much for joining us. Good evening. It's a question of brilliant home form for Portsmouth and an awful away form. I guess how much of a factor this season has been, all the cliches, the narrow pitch, the sort of fervent home support, and how much that plays into the hands of a team that sort of maybe enjoys that out of possession game.
They all apply and they're all very accurate. Thanks for having me on the show. I feel like I've turned you down quite a few times because our schedules just didn't align, but I'm here. I think they go in our favour and against us. I think one of the biggest reasons for our home form is, as you say, pitch is tiny. It's horrible. I took my mate who's an Exeter fan to the game on Wednesday against Stoke, and he was blown away by it. Whereas the opposite applies in away games, in that we're not a team at the moment that's got loads of athleticism or power in the squad. For the most part, there are some, of course, and a lot of teams that we'll go and visit, like I know Sunderland, for example, massive pitch. They can use the wide area as well, and we just can't really go for that. It's quite painful. But I mean, I've been listening along to the show, and the pessimism is quite depressing. But also makes me feel better about myself because I'm very much an optimist. And the way I see it is that what we're doing at home, it's not a fluke. It's not like, you got lucky there, We deserved, I think, all of our wins pretty much. And I don't think a team that is this, I'm going to curse it now, a team that is this good at home and this irresistible at home can carry on being this horrendous away. I'm not saying we're going to, match the level of our home form or that our home form is going to be sustained, but I feel like by end of Feb, early March, we won't be losing 7 away games in a row. Fingers crossed, anyway.
Let's hope not. Do you think, Jack, as much as I'm a massive admirer of John Mousinho in terms of his ability to frame challenges as opportunities and his culture setting style, I think is a massive part of how you've been able to overcome that slow start. I also feel like it's been difficult for him because maybe there was an inadequacy to the recruitment in the summer, and it's meant that when you did make those 5 changes for the trip to West Brom, there was a pretty fair drop-off. I mean, I can find it in my paper here. You're going from Jordan Williams to Swanson, you're going from Atkinson to Towler, you're going from Potts to Dazelle, you're going from Lang to Sadie, and from Murphy to Devlin. I would say in 3 or 4 of those 5 cases, that's a bit of a drop-off in quality.
Yeah, and I think you look at it's not just a drop-off in quality, it's a drop-off in power and athleticism. And when you're a squad that don't have that in abundance, when you lose a little bit of it, it's going to hurt you even more. Yeah, it's been tough because I don't do away games. Maybe I'm quite lucky not to do them this season. But I do feel for.
You're thinking you're a top 6 side.
Yeah.
Jack said they're
we
still
lose away games.
The top. Yeah, you still think in some way you could still get promoted here, Jack? I think that's.
Yeah. We not? Is that? Oh,
well, mathematically, I think you still can.
Hey, look, it's not over.
If it's the 1950s again, where you don't know what the away road.
Yeah.
Just
no one look. Where was I? I can't remember what I was saying. Something about. Oh yes, I remember now. I don't blame Mousinho for the mass rotations against West Brom and against Bristol City. Yeah, as painful as it was, and as harmful as it was in the short term, I think ultimately he didn't have much of a choice. I think you either do what you do and you maybe rotate 1 or 2 a game and you kind of coast along. But then when Murphy gets a hamstring injury, let's say Lang gets a bad injury, maybe Richard gets a bad injury, then it's why is he not rotated? The owners yada yada. The pitches are rubbish. Where's the dome on the training ground? You cannot win. Football is brutal, and obviously you've got to take the opinions of supporters with a pinch of salt. It's ironic me saying that as a supporter, but ultimately, yes, John Mousinho is still a young manager. He's got a lot to learn. He's not perfect by any means, but I'm just going to trust him because so far I've not been given many reasons to doubt his methods. And look, if we go and we beat Millwall tomorrow night, which would be a tough ask, but is doable, and we put in a good performance against Burnley, I'd say he's vindicated.
Yeah, I get the pleasure of speaking to Tom and Tom Chappell quite often.
And it is a pleasure, by the way. It is a pleasure.
He goes to every game, and like you say, I have a phone call every day after a match, and the tone difference after a game at Fratton Park and a game away from home is so distinctive. It's difficult. I think I've watched too many Pompey games this season, to be honest. I think I always find myself watching those games too, because sometimes I just do sort of naturally align differently to the Oxford matches at the moment. So I'm having a good insight into them. And there is just such a difference between the Pompey you see at Fratton Park and the Pompey you see away. It is night and day. That result against Stoke was so aggressive and so front-footed and so fearless, and then against West Brom, you look like a team that have never played in the Championship before. And there are other aspects to it, like you say there. You've got a team in West Brom that are a good team, coached by a very good manager, and lots of circumstances, like you say, the pitch and the fact that you are playing on the road, and there is a lack of confidence in that, and you just do look quite shy away, and that's the word I'd use. You look shy. You don't look as it sounds basic, but there's just a sheer lack of confidence difference between the team that you see play at Fratton Park and the team you see play elsewhere, because there will be a psychological impact on that too. We look at the tactical elements and the fact that there's a heavy rotation and the other underlying issues, but how can, as a player, that away from home your record is so poor? Naturally, there are going to be issues that come with that. The fact that you just cannot compare a team like Pompey home and away. It's actually really quite rare. But I'm in the same boat as Jack. I think you can't really deny that what John Mousinho has done in a short amount of time. People forget. I think John Mousinho's name has been spoken so much that people go convinced he's been a manager longer than he has. Is it not even 2 years since he was
just
sat on our
gone
bench?
2 years.
Yeah,
just
he
gone
sat
2
on our
years.
bench for
Stupid.
United as a centre back reserve option and a set piece coach, and he's now managing in the Championship after a promotion from League One, and that can sometimes be forgotten. But yeah, it's bizarre. It is really, really bizarre to see that change, and I think there is a serious lack of depth, and there is a big window that still Pompey have to approach. I did a video yesterday looking at this Pompey squad. The wide areas look really bleak. I know Jack's been quite aggressive on it.
Yeah.
In his tweets, but until you actually look at the depth and look at the options. I did a video speaking about every team that got promoted and their depth, and you look at Pompey's, it is literally Matt Ritchie and Josh Murphy, and beyond that you haven't really got too much else whatsoever. So when the rotation has to come, you've got to start playing players now that aren't actually wingers. We know the wide threats of a John Mousinho team are crucial, and you can't do that without the Murphys and the Richies. The depth is a problem. I also look at the big statement that came out of that video, and that's the League One players that have really struggled to make a step up. And I still feel that's the case. I know Paddy Lane's been out injured, and actually you felt that just before that injury, you thought there might be a chance that we could start seeing a change in his fortunes. And then in classic Pompey style, he's going to be out for a long period of time. So yeah, but there are shining lights. You know, Freddie Potts has been exceptional. I've been so impressed by him in midfield. He looks like a player that shouldn't be really involved in a Championship relegation battle. He could play far higher up the table. And there was talk about West Ham recalling. That's not going to happen now. But even with those conversations, it does suggest that he's in a really good place. The issues in injury have been a severe problem. I'm sure Jack knows this, but Marlon Pack, I think if you looked at the start of the season, would you say that Paul and Shaughnessy are probably going to be the preferred pair? I can tell you Marlon Pack on his own has played more games at centre-back than those two together. And that's crazy. If you'd have said that Marlon Pack was going to play more games at centre-back than those two combined, you probably would be, as Jack is right now, shaking his head, rubbing his eyes, and probably having some kind of fever. But that's the truth, isn't it? It's the fact you've got a player that is not a centre-back having to play in that position. Riley Towler, I don't think, was up to League One level. He's played 10 Championship games because that's been forced into him. So
just credit to Riley. Riley Towler's a weird one. Sorry to cut you off. In that we brought him in just before Mousinho got appointed for next to nothing, really. And he kind of played, I think it's about 20 games he played straight. And then he kind of got dropped towards the end of Mousinho's first half a season. And then the next season, we had Paul and we had Raggett and we had Shaughnessy, and he didn't really get a look. He made 4 games last season. And Riley Towler's a player that's always, you've gone, every window you've gone, could do it alone. But he's just never got it because out of circumstance or whatever. But I do kind of feel for him because I think he's been quite good, actually. And I'm quite critical of Riley because I don't think he's been entirely up for it all the time. But especially kind of the last month, I think he's been quite good. But Mousinho kind of, he's had to, yeah. Yeah, when you've got, certain people who I respect dearly but aren't up to playing at centre-half in the Championship, you've got to be good enough. And I feel bad for him because, rightly or wrongfully, it feels like Mousinho drops him every time he kind of gets an opportunity to, a bit like Sean Raggett, to be honest. But no, it's, as you say, we've got quite a lot of centre-halves now. We do. We've got Abano Boat injured. He came in the summer, was on the bench, and then in training took a shot and his patella tendon exploded. Shaughnessy, mystery injury. Paul come back from ACL, so you're always going to have different breakdowns. That's fine. Towler seemingly maybe not trusted. Who else have we got? And then Hayden Matthews coming in. Rob Atkinson, who's just come back from big ACL injury, looked very good actually, but he's still coming back. And then Tom McIntyre, who I don't know, he's in the nicest possible way, he's nowhere near good enough. So you've got a lot of players there, but it's the lack of quality until now, which hopefully is going to improve with Hayden Matthews coming in. Fingers crossed.
Second most used players, by the way, Pompey this season, 32. You definitely your squad list in terms of minutes played and matches played is very, very high.
Everyone gets to go. Everyone gets to go.
It's like,
Isn't that weird though? We're talking that's a weird contradiction though, guys, isn't it? That on the one hand we're talking about Portsmouth not having enough squad depth and not being able to deal with certain players being rested and there being a massive drop off in some cases. And yet, on the other hand, we're talking about a team that's used 32 different players.
Yeah, but we've used 32 different players because they all keep getting injured. Like, look at Jacob Farrell, for me, top left back, so good. Played against, I think it was either Oxford or Sheffield United. I can't quite remember.
Sheffield United didn't play against us.
Sheffield
We had Conor Ogilvie.
Oh, good luck.
He's played 27 games. He's your most played player, I think, in terms of minutes played.
Yeah, Anyway, Jacob Farrell, really, really good left back in my opinion. Played one game, injured the rest of the season. You know, you've got players like Elias Sorensen, for example. I think Elias Sorensen, there is a player there. He was rubbish for us. You know, no two ways about it. Came in for 250k in the summer, sold for 250k in January. Next little impact. And the issue isn't necessarily the numbers; it's the quality of those numbers. And a lot of it isn't because they're older PK players who just aren't good enough. It's because they're younger and they need a lot. Like Harvey Blair, for example, is our third, fourth choice winger. We've got 4 players who can play on the wing. Harvey Blair's one of them. Kid needs a loan. He needs to play in League 2 football. It's the drop off in quality is so big. It's not numbers. It's quality.
Mm. So 2 questions to finish off then, Jack. First one is, does John Mousinho start next season in charge regardless of division?
Yes.
And second question is, do Portsmouth beat the drop?
Yes.
There you go, brilliant. That's very concise. That's perfect. Normally you get you get lots of a bigger answer, but I quite
short and sweet.
Yeah, short and sweet. Love it. Jack, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Likewise, Jack, co-host, thanks so much as well. This has been the EFL Debate Championship podcast. Get subscribed to us on YouTube and on Spotify at EFL Debate, because that would help us out a lot. And for now, we'll see you next week.